Most of you know that summer is my season. And so I spend as much time as possible out on the back deck in the deck tent, which essentially becomes my summer residence. Most of you also know that I tend to be very nocturnal. I often work during the evening on my laptop, and that stretches very often into the early morning. Well, such was the case last Thursday. I was working on the bulletin out in the deck tent, and as I was plugging away, I heard this strange noise. I couldn't tell what it was. It was a little mystifying. So I took out my phone camera and I walked to the edge of the deck and I shone the light out onto the patio where the noise was coming from. There was a skunk trying to break into a garbage bag that I had not yet delivered to the curb because it was garbage day. And when he saw me, he didn't flinch. He didn't run. He just kind of casually ignored me and went about his business. Now, there was nothing in the bag of interest to him because that was all in the compostables. And finally, he just nonchalantly walked away and pretended like I wasn't even there. Now, that's only partially surprising because I've seen this guy before. As a matter of fact, he and I have had a couple of encounters, even during the daytime. He's certainly not intimidated by me in the least. So I go back to work. About 20 minutes later, I hear another voice, only this one is different and it's a lot closer. And so I look up from my laptop and the skunk is in the deck tent with me. He's like 3 feet away. I looked at him, he looked at me, and I'm thinking, this could go very, very badly. Because if he gets spooked at all, I'm gonna be looking for another deck tent and I'm going to need a month-long decontamination leave of absence. This is a little bit tense for me. I have to tell you that right from the get-go. He started walking toward me. At this point, this is a little bit tense for me. I have to tell you that right from the get-go. He started walking toward me. He got this close. I'm not kidding. He was right at my feet. He's sniffing the ground around me. Maybe he thought I was the one that stunk. And then he just left. Mr. Pepe Le Pew just makes his exit, and it's like nothing has ever happened. Let me tell you, I was the passive-aggressive one because what was going on inside is not what I was trying to convey on the outside, because that could have had some dire consequences for me. And so let me ask you, do you know people, or do you have people in your life where that's the relationship? Where what's really happening inside is not necessarily what people, or you in particular, will see on the outside. Passive aggression is very much a feature of life. And I want to talk for a few minutes today about what it is, where it comes from, the effects, and why it's so important for us to make sure that that is not part of our life, because it stands in absolute contrast to the life that Jesus has called us to. Now, you know that passive aggression is not a phrase that's used in Scripture itself, but it is all over the documents of the Old and the New Testament. And it is something that we need to be serious about, something we need to be aware of, because it has great consequences for the relationships that we have, both with God and with other people. And so let me just be clear. When I'm talking about passive aggression, I'm talking about the fact that our outer behavior may not reflect the true nature of our inner feelings. And that comes out in many different ways. I think that it is very important for us to understand that passive aggression is not always a character flaw. It is, in fact, something that we have to do to be safe, or to at least feel safe and secure. And that really lies at the heart of lots of this. There are lots of people who are passive aggressive for all the wrong reasons, but there are cases when it is just trying to be safe and secure that makes people do what they're doing. That's an excellent point, one that we really need to be acknowledging, because I think if we look at so many of the things we're going to talk about in the next few weeks, and we see these as just negative, without stopping to figure out why people are in that situation to begin with, then that's not fair to them, and it's going to lead us into an area of judgment that we don't need to be in. So yes, we do have to have some understanding.
It's also,
if you are masking your feelings, especially if it's behind this veneer of politeness and nicety, but things are percolating and festering below, that is going to do a lot of damage. It's going to interfere with our faith. It's going to interfere with our relationships. It can even interfere with our relationship with God. And the way that this often comes out is you will see that there are these subtle jabs that people will take, or maybe you're the one that's doing that. It can come from a lot of different places. It may be pride. It may be pride. Because if you feel that you are superior to somebody else, maybe you're not going to want to confront them over something, but you just feel inherently that you're right and they're wrong. And that can lead you to a certain kind of behavior that makes you arrogant, that makes you unapproachable, that makes you troublesome. And if it's not pride, maybe it's exactly the opposite, which goes back to what we were just saying. If you feel insecure for any reason, justified or not, you may feel like you can't be out there with what you really feel. And that may cause you to hide what's truly going on in your heart and in your life. So it can be the pendulum. Either you're too proud and too haughty, or you're too insecure to be who you really desperately want to be because you don't think that it's safe. And sometimes it is not. Sometimes what that does is it makes us placaters. Do you know what a placater is? A placater is somebody who goes along to get along. Somebody who will give in instead of standing up. Somebody who is so anxious to keep the peace that even when there is a matter of conviction, they will just hold their tongue. Have you heard about these people that go to the store for some milk and they don't come back? They just disappear. If you've never heard those stories, I have a few I can tell you. My experience has been that most of the people who abandon relationships suddenly and drastically and just disappear from it, that usually comes from a place of placation, where these people have given in so much. They have not been true to their true feelings, their authentic self, and so they feel that they just can't take it anymore, and then they leave. And the other person is often totally mystified by this. Now look, you know and I know that you cannot live your life, you cannot have your relationships if you are always walking on eggshells. We're not designed to live in relationship that way. And yet so many people do that because they don't feel that they can be who they need to be or who they want to be. Now, what's all this got to do with spirituality? Well, it's very simple. Jesus is the one who said in Matthew chapter 12 that out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth will speak. In other words, what's in here is eventually going to come out here. And if we are filled with things like pride, insecurity, bitterness, selfish ambition, envy, jealousy, and all the rest of that, all those things that can make us hostile but unwilling to confront people, that can do us a great deal of harm. It can hurt us physiologically and emotionally and spiritually. We have to be people who have the ability to be as Jesus would have us be. And if we are going to hide our feelings, if we're not going to actually speak the truth to people, not just in the words that we say, but the lives that we live, that will have huge consequences. So let me just ask you, what do you think you can do if you find yourself where either you are the perpetrator or you are the victim? What do we do about this very serious problem? What's the way around this? And I'm looking at this both from a spiritual and a practical way. Honestly? Start speaking honestly. Absolutely. You know, there's a whole passage on that in Ephesians chapter 4. It's funny you should say that because in verse 15, Paul's the one who says, you need to learn how to speak the truth in love. Now, there are two extremes. There are people that are so blunt, so brash, so unfiltered that they just get it out there. And most of the people who are like that, in my experience, are very proud of that. Oh, you never have to worry about what's on my mind because I'm going to tell you. Well, all right, but maybe that's not such a great way to handle it anyway, because if you have no consideration for others and you're just intent on making your point or winning the argument or having your preference, that is not the considerate, that is not the godly way to approach a relationship. It is important to tell the truth, but it is also important to be gentle and to be humble and to make sure that we are telling the truth, but in a loving way. And I think that is absolutely right. And it's not easy all the time to speak the truth in love. But the other extreme, aside from that, let me just tell you kind of mentality, is this inability or unwillingness to even have the conversation. And a lot of this passive-aggressive feeling and this action that we see comes from an unwillingness to confront people. Because it's usually when the chips are down, it's usually when the stakes are high that we find ourselves unwilling to have those difficult conversations because we're worried about what's going to come out of that. And Jesus is the one who says, in Matthew chapter 18, if you have a problem with somebody, you need to go with them. You need to honestly communicate what your concerns are. And if you're really worried that they're not going to hear you out, or if they won't listen, then you take somebody with you. You try to resolve this. But the one thing we cannot do is to let anything, whether it's anger or bitterness or resentment, we cannot let any of those things fester under the surface, because things are going to come out in a very inappropriate way if we do that. And so Jesus is the one that says, yes, we have got to do this in such a way that we can be open about what we feel, and we can be honest about who we are, and let the chips fall where they may. Yeah. Anything that's left unattended, well, that's not going to go well. As a matter of fact, Paul addresses that in the same chapter. Listen to this. He says, since you've heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, created to be like God. Your nature needs to be recreated so you can be like God, righteous and holy. Stop telling lies. And even if they're just little white lies, or even if you're just subtly hiding what you really think and what you really feel, that still qualifies as a lie. Tell your neighbor the truth, for we're all part of the same body. And don't let sin control you. Don't let anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. In other words, deal with it. Don't let it percolate under the surface where it's going to do more harm. Then he goes on to say, don't use foul or abusive language. And that can sometimes be part of this passive aggression that I'm talking about. Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be an encouragement to everyone who hears them. Everyone who hears them. And don't bring sorrow to God's Holy Spirit by the way you live. Remember, he's identified you as his own, guaranteeing that you will be saved on that day of redemption. So I think really what I'm saying here is it begins with examination and confession. We need to go to God and ask him to address the heart of the matter, which is the heart. Remember, Jesus says what's in your heart is going to come out of your mouth. That ought to be a very sobering reality for all of us. For all of us. This is really necessary for us to perfect, because if we don't take this seriously, it is going to impair our relationships, whether we're at home, at work, at the gym, in the church. It doesn't matter what the setting is. We have to have the freedom to be who we are. We have to learn how to communicate in an honest, open way. But it begins by saying, okay, let me acknowledge what is mine. In Jeremiah, Chapter 17, the prophet says, God searches all hearts. He reveals all secret motives. And sometimes the resentment and the hostility that we feel, even if it seems so subtle, is there and we don't even realize it. Or even if we do realize it, it's not something that we're consciously doing. Sometimes it just creeps out because it's so big in our hearts and we just have to do something with it. And if we don't address that, then there's going to be a big price to be paid. Examination, Ask God to show you what your true feelings are, and more than that, where they come from. Ask Him to show you what's appropriate and what needs to change. And then after you've gone through that process, you need to do some self-examination where you're able to see where you're being proud, where you're simply trying to exert control over the situation. And really, if you think about it, that's what this all comes down to. It's about control. When you feel like you're not in control of another person or another situation, then often passive aggression is the tactic we use to cope. And it doesn't have to be that way. We can do more to be more. Examination, confession, self-examination, speaking the truth in love. And then I think what we need to bring into our lives is the big three: humility, transparency, sincerity. If we will practice those three things, we're not going to have much to worry about when it comes to passive aggression, because God is going to help us see the truth about ourselves. And if we see the truth about ourselves through the power of His Spirit, the guidance of His Word, the encouragement of people in your life that you can trust, then He can help us to see the people in our lives in a much more real and accurate way. And then we won't have to use some of these things that we often resort to. It's really important for us to understand that if we are humble enough, then we're not going to subject people to some of the things that otherwise we would. If we are transparent, then things are not going to be underneath the surface, causing us a great deal of harm. They're not going to blow up in our faces when we just can't take it anymore. And if we have that sincerity, that will make all the difference in the world. Do you know where the word sincerity comes from? It's actually from the French. Because back in the day, when artists were carving statues, they had to deal with cracks. That was very common in the artistic world. And so they would use wax. Whenever there was a flaw or whenever there was a crack, they would use wax to hide the problem, to try to strengthen the statue. And so if you had a statue and it was sincere without wax, then there was no flaw, there was no fix. It was just what it was. And I would submit to you that that's what God wants from you. He wants you to be open and honest about who you are, how you feel, what you need, and what you can do for other people. Because if we will practice those things, if we will do what we can to root out all of the things that otherwise are going to be dangerous, then we're going to be okay. One of the things I really want to stress here is that we're not talking about a different tactic. We're talking about a different truth. If you are the one who's guilty of the passive aggression, then you need to ask God to change your heart, and He has promised to do that. He can give you a heart that is different and real, legitimate and true. And then you won't have to worry about so many of the things we have to worry about if we're so intent on just hiding the truth about who we are, what we think, and how we feel. It really comes down to that. Let God change your heart. If you will do that, if you will be sincere enough, if you will be open and honest enough with God and other people, then even when some of those difficult people corner us, it doesn't necessarily have to lead to a big stink.